What if I told you that a simple cleaning lady managed to decipher an ancestral code that left the world's greatest specialists utterly baffled, while the most powerful billionaire desperately tried to solve pre-Hispanic symbols that threatened to destroy his empire? The woman who cleaned his offices was hiding a family secret that would change everything forever. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and if this story is intriguing you as much as it is me, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button for more mysteries like this one. The executive elevator wasn't supposed to stop on the ground floor. It had never done so in the 15 years Delphine Clayton had worked at Horizon Technologies, Seattle's most prestigious tech corporation. Yet on this particular Monday morning, as pewter clouds hung low over Elliott Bay and rain tapped a melancholy rhythm against the building's glass facade, the brushed steel doors slid open directly in front of her cleaning cart. Delphine froze, yellow rubber gloves dripping with window cleaner, her reflection distorted in the polished elevator interior. She instinctively moved to push her cart aside, to make herself smaller, more invisible, a skill she had perfected over decades of working in spaces where she was meant to be unseen. But before she could retreat, a hurricane of activity burst from within. Thaddeus Remington III, CEO and president of Horizon Technologies, paced the elevator's confines like a caged predator, his Italian leather shoes squeaking against the marble floor. Papers fluttered from his trembling hands, not the crisp white documents that typically accompanied his immaculate appearance, but yellowed pages covered in strange symbols that seemed to dance in the fluorescent light. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and a fine sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. "I don't care if you have to wake up every linguist from here to Cambridge," he shouted into his phone, oblivious to Delphine's presence. "This isn't negotiable. We have less than 2 months to decipher this ancestral code or everything. Do you understand me? Everything I've built is at risk." He kicked the elevator wall in frustration, sending a paper spiraling toward Delphine. It landed at her feet, face up, revealing a complex pattern of symbols that sent an electric current through her body. Cherokee syllabary intertwined with modern numerical sequences. Her grandmother's voice, long silent, suddenly whispered in her mind, "Digadolivensgi, little one. The old symbols speak truths that echo across time." Delphine's heart stuttered as recognition bloomed. The spiral pattern in the corner, the intersecting lines beneath what looked like a 7. She had seen them before, traced in cornmeal on her grandmother's wooden table during summer nights in the Smoky Mountains. Before she could process this revelation, Thaddeus noticed her for the first time. His eyes, the color of winter ice, narrowed. "What are you looking at?" he snapped, striding forward to snatch the paper from the floor. For a breathless moment, their gazes locked, his filled with panic barely concealed beneath aristocratic disdain, hers with quiet recognition. She fought to hide. "Nothing, sir," Delphine murmured, lowering her eyes and pulling her cart aside. "Just cleaning the windows." Thaddeus straightened his posture, reassembling his empire builder facade piece by piece. "Make sure the Eastern Conference room is spotless by noon. The advisory board is meeting." His voice had returned to its usual controlled baritone, but something in his eyes remained fractured. As he walked away, phone already pressed back to his ear, Delphine realized her hands were trembling. The symbols on that paper had awakened something dormant inside her, a connection to a past she had carefully packed away, like her grandmother's quilts in cedar chests, protective and preserving. She turned back to the window, methodically spraying and wiping in practiced circles, but her reflection now seemed different somehow, as if the glass had become a portal between worlds, between the woman who cleaned invisibly and the child who had once sat at her grandmother's feet, learning secrets written in ancient patterns. The Seattle skyline blurred through the rain-streaked glass, buildings cutting the gray sky like modern totems. In that moment, Delphine understood that sometimes fate arrives not in grand gestures, but in small mechanical errors. An elevator stopping where it shouldn't, a glimpse of symbols meant to remain hidden, the sudden collision of worlds designed to stay separate. The most profound truths often reveal themselves in the spaces between intention and accident, in the thin margins where the unseen finally come into focus. Tuesday morning arrived with the relentless efficiency of Seattle's early autumn, gray skies releasing a misty veil that was neither quite rain nor quite fog. Delphine moved through her cleaning routine with practiced precision, her mind replaying yesterday's elevator encounter like a film stuck on loop. The mysterious symbols on those yellowed pages had lodged themselves in her memory, awakening echoes of her grandmother's voice that she had long suppressed in favor of practicality. She was dusting the reception area's sleek chrome light fixtures when Marcus from security approached, his usual friendly smile replaced by an expression of professional neutrality. "Ms. Clayton," he said, voice lowered despite the empty lobby. "Mr. Lawson needs to see you in his office now." Delphine's stomach tightened. Gerald Lawson was head of corporate security, a man she had seen but never spoken to in all her years at Horizon Technologies. She set down her feather duster, removed her gloves and smoothed her uniform, aware that her hands left damp imprints on the navy polyester. "Did he say what this is about?" she asked, attempting to keep her voice steady. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. "Just that it's urgent." The elevator ride to the 37th floor was a journey between worlds. Each ascending floor represented another stratum of corporate hierarchy she rarely penetrated. The cleaning staff operated primarily before dawn and after dusk, maintaining the illusion that conference rooms and executive bathrooms cleansed themselves during the night like magical realms. Lawson's office was a monument to surveillance. Monitors displayed feeds from throughout the building, and a wall of security credentials glinted under recessed lighting. The man himself sat behind a desk of polished concrete, his expression unreadable as he gestured for her to sit. "Do you know why you're here, Ms. Clayton?" he asked without preamble, folding his hands atop a sleek tablet. "No, sir," she answered, though a cold realization was dawning. The cameras. Of course there were cameras in the lobby. He tapped the tablet, and a high-definition image appeared on the wall screen. Delphine frozen in the act of examining the fallen document before Thaddeus had retrieved it. Her face in the image showed something she rarely allowed herself to express: recognition, wonder, and a flash of certainty. "Security footage from yesterday morning, 8:17 a.m., Lawson stated. "You appear quite interested in Mr. Remington's private documents." Delphine's throat constricted. 15 years of unblemished service could disappear in an instant. Her mother's medical bills, Cordelia's student loan payments she still helped with despite her daughter's protests, all depended on this job. I didn't, she began, then stopped, squared her shoulders, and decided on honesty. The paper fell at my feet. I saw symbols that looked familiar before Mr. Remington retrieved it. Lawson's eyebrows rose fractionally. Familiar how? Before she could answer, the door swung open. Thaddeus Remington strode in, his presence immediately commanding the space. Today he was impeccably composed, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Delphine's annual salary, no trace of yesterday's dishevelment. "This is the woman?" he asked Lawson, though his penetrating gaze never left Delphine. "Yes, sir. Delphine Clayton. 15 years with our custodial contractor. Night shift supervisor for the past 8. Thaddeus circled her chair slowly, a predator assessing potential prey. "Ms. Clayton, what exactly did you see on that document?" Delphine felt the weight of her two worlds colliding. The professional cleaner who remained invisible, and the granddaughter of Adsila Walkingstick, who had taught her that true strength often came wrapped in humility. She lifted her chin slightly. "I saw Cherokee syllabary mixed with what looked like mathematical notation, sir. The spiral formation in the corner is a pattern my grandmother used to draw when telling stories about the ancient traders." The silence that followed her statement was absolute. Thaddeus and Lawson exchanged a look that Delphine couldn't interpret. "And how exactly would a cleaning woman recognize Cherokee syllabary?" Thaddeus asked, his tone somewhere between incredulity and suspicion. The words stung, but Delphine kept her expression neutral. "My grandmother was full-blooded Cherokee from the Qualla boundary in North Carolina. She raised me until I was 12, speaking both English and Cherokee in our home." Thaddeus's expression shifted, calculation replacing disbelief. He pulled a chair directly in front of her, an unprecedented act that violated the invisible barrier between executives and support staff. "Ms. Clayton," he said, his voice suddenly lower, more intimate. "That document is part of a complex puzzle that arrived at my office 3 weeks ago. With it came a threat. Decipher the code within 2 months or watch everything I've built collapse. I've had world-class cryptographers and indigenous language specialists working around the clock without progress." He leaned forward, the subtle scent of his expensive cologne registering against the chemical smell of cleaning products that perpetually clung to her uniform. If you truly recognize elements of this code, you may be surprisingly valuable. The word surprisingly hung between them, highlighting the vast gulf between their positions. Even in seeking her help, he couldn't fully conceal his condescension. "I don't know if I can help, sir," Delphine said carefully. "I only recognized a few symbols." "You'll try nonetheless," Thaddeus declared. "Not a request, but a command. Report to my office tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. You'll be given access to the document under supervised conditions." He stood abruptly, straightening his already perfect cuffs. "And Ms. Clayton, this matter requires absolute discretion. You'll continue your regular cleaning duties. Appearances must be maintained, but you'll work on the translation after hours. If you succeed, there will be appropriate compensation." After Thaddeus departed, Lawson provided her with a temporary security badge, allowing limited access to the executive floor. His expression suggested he'd already calculated the minimal probability of her success. As Delphine rode the service elevator back to the basement, where the cleaning staff prepared for their shifts, she watched the floor numbers descend, returning her to her proper place in the hierarchy. But something had shifted inside her, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface of her carefully constructed identity. The symbols had recognized her as much as she had recognized them. Her grandmother had once told her that knowledge waits patiently for the right vessel, sometimes for generations. Perhaps this mysterious document had been searching for her all along, navigating time and circumstance to find its way into her hands. The security guard outside Thaddeus's office eyed Delphine's temporary badge with thinly veiled skepticism when she arrived at precisely 7 a.m. the following morning. His gaze traveled from her sensible shoes to her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, clearly questioning how this unremarkable woman had gained access to the most restricted floor of Horizon Technologies. "Mr. Remington is expecting me," she said quietly, her accent, which she had spent decades softening, suddenly more pronounced under stress. The guard checked his tablet and nodded reluctantly. "He said to send you straight in." Thaddeus's office was a testament to calculated minimalism, a vast space dominated by windows overlooking Puget Sound, furnished with architectural pieces that suggested importance without trying to prove it. The man himself stood at a light table installed specifically for examining the mysterious document, which lay protected between sheets of archival glass. "Prompt. Good," he said, without looking up, a statement rather than a greeting. "Coffee's on the credenza if you need it." Delphine didn't move toward the offered coffee. In 15 years, she had cleaned this credenza hundreds of times, but had never been invited to take anything from it. The role reversal felt precarious, as if one wrong move might shatter this strange new reality. "I'd like to see the document, please," she said instead. Thaddeus gestured her forward, finally meeting her eyes. In the morning light, she noticed faint shadows beneath his sharp cheekbones, evidence of sleepless nights that his expensive grooming couldn't fully conceal. "The full message arrived in 3 parts, he explained, pointing to the separate sheets. "No sender information, no digital trace. Old-fashioned paper mail directly to my private office." The document before her was more complex than the single page she had glimpsed. Multiple sheets contained intricate patterns of Cherokee syllabary, interwoven with mathematical symbols and astronomical notations. Along the margins were drawings reminiscent of ancient trading maps, with spiral patterns marking what appeared to be locations. As Delphine leaned closer, the years fell away. She was 7 years old again, sitting on a worn rug in her grandmother's cabin, as Adsila traced similar patterns in a shallow basket of cornmeal. "These are the old words, Delphine," her grandmother had said, voice like autumn leaves rustling. "Before the white man's letters tried to cage our language on flat pages, these speak with many voices at once. They tell where to go, when to trade, how to return home safely. Only those with pure hearts can truly read them, for they change their meaning if greed guides the eye." "Ms. Clayton?" Thaddeus's voice pulled her from the memory. "Do you recognize anything?" Delphine placed her finger near but not touching a particular symbol configuration. This spiral with 7 radiating lines represents a trading crossroads. In Cherokee stories, important sites were often marked this way. She moved to another section. And these connected diamonds with the marks inside, my grandmother called these star paths. They track celestial positions for navigation. Thaddeus watched her with growing intensity. Can you translate the actual text? Not immediately, she admitted. The syllabary here is archaic, using formations my grandmother only mentioned in certain stories, and it's interwoven with mathematical notations I don't understand. She straightened, meeting his gaze directly. To decipher this properly would take time and research. I would need access to resources, books on Cherokee history, mathematical analysis tools. Resources can be provided, Thaddeus said, his tone calculating, but there are conditions. Of course there would be conditions. In Delphine's experience, people of Thaddeus's standing never offered opportunities without carefully constructed limitations. First, he continued, this arrangement remains completely confidential. You'll tell no one, not your co-workers, friends, family. As far as anyone knows, you're simply putting in extra hours cleaning. He began pacing, hands clasped behind his back. Second, you'll continue all your regular duties. This project happens after hours only. Third, you'll work under surveillance at all times when accessing the document. Each condition reinforced the chasm between them. He remained the powerful executive, she the subordinate granted a temporary and conditional elevation. And if I succeed, Delphine asked, what then? Thaddeus paused, seemingly surprised by her directness. If, and it remains a significant if, you actually decipher this code, you'll be compensated with a one-time bonus of $50,000. The figure struck Delphine like a physical blow. It represented freedom from debt, proper care for her mother, perhaps even the small house she'd been quietly dreaming of for decades. I'll need one more condition of my own, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Thaddeus's eyebrows rose. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I need to visit my mother's house in North Carolina. There are books and materials of my grandmother's that might help with the translation, items passed down that contain similar symbols. A calculating look crossed his face as he weighed the request. 3 days, expenses covered, but the document doesn't leave this building. Agreed, Delphine said. As she was escorted to a small office that would become her research space, Delphine felt a curious doubling of her identity. On one floor, she would continue pushing her cleaning cart, invisible to the corporate strivers who barely registered her presence. On another, she would unravel mysteries connected to her heritage, becoming briefly visible, if only as a tool for Thaddeus's purposes. Later that evening, as she mopped the conference room where executives had earlier discussed quarterly projections, Delphine caught her reflection in the wall of windows. The Seattle skyline twinkled beyond her transparent image, a woman suspended between worlds, between visible and invisible, between the ancient knowledge that flowed in her blood and the modern reality that had relegated that knowledge to folklore. Her grandmother had often said that wisdom reveals itself only when the student is ready to receive it. Perhaps all these years of watching silently from the margins had prepared Delphine for this moment, training her eyes to see patterns others missed, her mind to hold multiple truths simultaneously, her heart to recognize ancestral calls across the generations. The mop moved across the floor in practiced circles, while in her mind, symbols danced like constellations awaiting rediscovery. By the end of her first week working on the code, Delphine had established a grueling new routine. Her days began at 4 a.m. with her regular cleaning shift, followed by 8 hours deciphering the mysterious document in the small windowless room Thaddeus had assigned her, before returning to evening cleaning duties until 9 p.m. She existed on vending machine sandwiches and brief naps in her car, her body aching from the physical labor that bookended her intellectual efforts. The surveillance camera in the corner of her makeshift research room maintained its unblinking vigil. Sometimes she felt Thaddeus watching through it, his skepticism palpable even through the digital distance. Other times, she sensed the security team's indifference, just another screen among dozens, showing a middle-aged cleaning woman hunched over papers and reference books, an unlikely codebreaker. On the 8th day, Evangeline Lancaster, Thaddeus's executive assistant, entered the room without knocking. Her Louboutin heels announced her presence like exclamation points against the industrial carpet, her silk blouse and perfectly tailored skirt emphasizing the stark contrast with Delphine's utilitarian uniform. Mr. Remington requires a progress report, she announced, not bothering with introductions. Her cultured Manhattan accent made even this simple statement sound like a judgment. Delphine straightened her tired shoulders. I've identified 3 distinct elements in the code. The Cherokee syllabary forms the foundation, but it's an archaic variant used before standardization. The mathematical notations appear to be a coordinate system, but not using modern conventions, and the astronomical symbols track celestial positions specific to certain dates. She pointed to her careful notes, where she had begun mapping correspondences between symbols. The code seems to be multi-layered. Each symbol's meaning shifts depending on its relationship to others around it. Evangeline's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched slightly, the first hint of genuine interest breaking through her professional mask. So you've made actual progress, she said, the surprise in her voice unmistakable. Some, Delphine acknowledged, but there's a complex mathematical element I'm struggling with. The numerical sequences seem to follow a pattern related to lunar cycles, but I don't have the advanced mathematics background to fully analyze it. Evangeline made a note on her tablet. I'll inform Mr. Remington. He may assign additional resources. She turned to leave, then hesitated, her gaze returning to the papers spread across the table. My grandmother was Choctaw, she said suddenly, the admission seemingly surprising even herself. She never taught us the language, said it wouldn't help us get ahead in the modern world. The unexpected personal revelation hung in the air between them, a momentary bridge across their professional divide. My grandmother believed the opposite, Delphine replied softly. She said forgetting our language was forgetting our way of seeing the world. Something flickered in Evangeline's carefully composed expression, recognition, perhaps regret, before her professional veneer reasserted itself. With a slight nod, she departed, heels clicking a staccato rhythm down the corridor. As the days progressed, Delphine's dual existence became increasingly surreal. In the mornings and evenings, she pushed her cleaning cart through the same corridors she now traversed during the day with her temporary security badge. The contrast was educational. When wearing her cleaner's uniform, executives would discuss confidential matters as if she were part of the furniture, offering insights they would never share if they recognized her as the woman working on their CEO's mysterious project. On the cleaning team, rumors had already begun circulating about her extended hours. Marjorie, who had cleaned alongside her for 12 years, cornered her in the supply closet one morning. You in some kind of trouble, Del? She asked, concern evident in her lined face. Nobody works these kinds of hours unless they're desperate for the overtime. Delphine felt the weight of the secrecy agreement pressing against her chest. These were her people, the invisible workforce that kept the gleaming corporate machine running smoothly. Lying to them felt like a betrayal. Just trying to put aside some extra money for Mum's care, she said, which wasn't entirely untrue. The memory care facility costs keep rising. Marjorie squeezed her shoulder sympathetically. Don't work yourself to death, honey. No job's worth that. The interaction left a bitter taste in Delphine's mouth. For the first time, she was experiencing the isolation that came with straddling worlds. Too knowledgeable now to fit comfortably among her peers, yet still fundamentally an outsider in the executive realm. That evening, as she cleaned the 37th floor bathrooms, she overheard 2 junior executives talking by the sinks, unaware or uncaring of her presence as she restocked toilet paper in the stalls. Remington's obsessed with that code thing, one said, voice lowered but still audible in the marble-tiled space. Apparently, he's got some cleaning lady working on it now. Can you believe that? Like having the gardener perform brain surgery. The other laughed. Desperate times, man. Word is, if he doesn't crack that code in the next month, investors are pulling out of the Rainier project, $2 billion down the drain. What's on those papers anyway? Nuclear launch codes? No idea, but Crawford in Legal says it's connected to some Native American land claim, something about the original property where the company was founded. Delphine froze, her hand still holding the toilet paper roll. The Rainier project was Horizon's most ambitious initiative, a massive expansion of their headquarters that had been featured in every Seattle business publication. If it was somehow connected to native land claims, her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in her ear. The past is never truly buried, Delphine. It waits patiently beneath the surface, like seeds through winter. That night, in her small apartment with its view of the highway, rather than the sound, Delphine spread her own research materials across her kitchen table, photocopies of the symbols she was legally allowed to take home, her grandmother's journals she'd retrieved from North Carolina, and books on Cherokee history borrowed from the library created a paper landscape of connections waiting to be discovered. As Seattle's persistent rain tapped against her windows, Delphine traced the spiral symbol that appeared repeatedly in both the mysterious document and her grandmother's journals. The similarities were too precise to be coincidental. Her fingers trembled slightly as a realization formed. This wasn't just any code. It was specifically connected to her family's lineage of Cherokee traders. The question that kept her awake until dawn was not whether she could decipher the code, but why it had found its way to Thaddeus Remington, and why now, after all these years of being carefully preserved by generations of her ancestors, something larger was unfolding, with her unwittingly at its center. As she finally drifted into exhausted sleep, the symbols danced behind her eyelids, rearranging themselves like stars shifting in the night sky, gradually revealing patterns that had been waiting patiently for her to discover them. The trip to North Carolina had yielded more than Delphine had dared hope. In her mother's attic, tucked inside a cedar chest her grandfather had carved decades ago, she found the woven blanket that had been the backdrop to so many of her grandmother's stories. The geometric patterns that had seemed merely decorative to her childhood eyes now revealed themselves as a complex system of symbols, some identical to those in the mysterious document. Back in Seattle, with renewed purpose, Delphine spread her findings across the research room table. The blanket's patterns provided a key to the document's structure, suggesting the code should be read not linearly, but in concentric circles, starting from the center and spiraling outward. This revelation accelerated her progress dramatically. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday when the first significant breakthrough occurred. Delphine had been cross-referencing astronomical symbols with her grandmother's journals when a pattern suddenly emerged. The document described specific star configurations visible only during certain seasons from precise locations in the Smoky Mountains. These celestial alignments corresponded to trading dates used by her ancestors to navigate the dangerous journey through the mountains with valuable goods. Her heart racing, she began translating the first coherent section. When the hunter's belt rises above Grandfather Mountain on the 7th night of the planting moon, follow the river's bend past 3 white oaks to where stone figures guard the entrance. The path revealed by morning light will lead to the place of speaking waters. Here our ancestors buried not gold, but knowledge more precious, the true accounting of exchanges made in good faith with those who came after. Delphine sat back, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't merely a historical record, it was directions to a specific location. And the reference to true accounting suggested documentation of some kind, perhaps of land transactions or trading agreements from the early contact period. The surveillance camera's red light blinked steadily in the corner as she carefully photographed her notes and the translated section. According to her agreement with Thaddeus, she was required to submit daily reports of any progress. When she arrived the next morning, she found Thaddeus already waiting in the research room, examining her notes with intense concentration. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Great Smoky Mountains," he said without preamble. "Specific coordinates hidden in astronomical alignments. Am I understanding your translation correctly?" Delphine nodded, setting down her bag. The first section describes a location where important documents were hidden, what it calls the true accounting of exchanges made in good faith. Something flickered across Thaddeus's face. Recognition, perhaps concern. "And you believe these are accurate directions? Not metaphorical?" "My grandmother's journals confirm similar navigation methods. Cherokee traders used celestial positions rather than maps that could be stolen or lost. The directions are precise if you understand the system." Thaddeus paced the small room, energy radiating from him like heat. "This changes everything. We need to accelerate the translation process. I'm assigning additional resources. Mathematical analysis, astronomical mapping software, whatever you need." His sudden enthusiasm unsettled Delphine. "May I ask why these documents are so important to Horizon Technologies? I overheard something about the Rainier project and native land claims." Thaddeus stilled, his eyes narrowing. "You're being paid to translate, Ms. Clayton, not to investigate company matters." His tone had cooled considerably. "But since you ask, yes, there's a connection. Horizon's original campus was built on land purchased from a developer in the 1980s. Recently, questions have been raised about the chain of title going back to the original territorial patents. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture she'd noticed he made when uncomfortable. If these documents prove what I believe they will, that all transactions were legitimate and properly recorded, it will silence those raising objections to our expansion. Delphine considered his explanation, not entirely convinced of its completeness. And if they don't? If the documents show something else? Then we'll address that situation appropriately, he replied, his corporate mask firmly back in place. Truth is always preferable to uncertainty, wouldn't you agree? As he left, Delphine felt the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. Thaddeus's interest seemed more personal than corporate, his intensity suggesting stakes beyond business expansion. That evening, as she mopped the executive floor corridors, Delphine passed the open door of the conference room where a late meeting was concluding. Thaddeus stood at the head of the table, addressing a group of suits with grim determination. The Jenkins Group is using every delay tactic to derail the Rainier project, he was saying. Their latest move is partnering with the Coastal Salish Heritage Foundation to question our land title. They know that if we don't break ground by the end of the quarter, our financing arrangement collapses. A grey-haired man at the table leaned forward. And this code business? You're certain it leads to documentation that will resolve the title issue? I stake my reputation on it, Thaddeus replied with uncharacteristic emotion. My grandfather was adamant that everything was properly documented. These papers will prove it once and for all. Delphine continued past the door, careful not to slow her pace and draw attention. So this was personal for Thaddeus, family legacy intertwined with corporate ambition. The mysterious code threatened not just Horizon Technologies, but the Remington family reputation. Later that night, in her apartment, Delphine carefully unwrapped her grandmother's blanket and spread it across her bed. The geometric patterns seemed to shift in the dim light, revealing new connections. Her fingers traced a particular symbol woven near the edge, a circle divided by a lightning bolt, surrounded by 7 stars. The same symbol appeared prominently in the mysterious document, marking what appeared to be a final destination. In her grandmother's stories, this symbol had represented a sacred place where the ancestors speak through the waters. Delphine closed her eyes, letting memory wash over her. She was 8 years old again, sitting on her grandmother's porch, as fireflies punctuated the summer darkness. Our family had a special duty, Adsila had told her, voice low as if sharing a sacred trust. When the white traders came with their papers and their promises, our ancestors were wise. They learned the newcomers' numbers and letters, but they kept our own way of recording truth. 2 paths of knowing side by side like streams that never quite meet but flow to the same ocean. Opening her eyes, Delphine faced a mounting certainty. Her connection to this code wasn't coincidental. Her family had been its keepers, generation after generation, though that knowledge had nearly been lost with her grandmother's passing. Whatever documents lay hidden in the Smoky Mountains, they were part of her heritage as much as Thaddeus's. As rain drummed against her windows, Delphine made a decision. She would continue the translation with renewed purpose, but she would also begin her own parallel investigation. Whatever truth lay encoded in those ancient symbols, she had as much right to it as the man who had accidentally brought it back into her life. The blanket's patterns seemed to pulse with ancestral approval as she carefully folded it and returned it to its cedar chest. Some knowledge was meant to be preserved, not merely possessed. 3 weeks into the project, the surveillance camera in Delphine's research room mysteriously malfunctioned, its blinking red light going dark during her afternoon session. Before she could report the issue, Evangeline slipped into the room, closing the door firmly behind her. "We have exactly 12 minutes, the executive assistant said, her normally perfect composure showing cracks of urgency. "The security feed is looping yesterday's footage, but the system will autocorrect soon." Delphine set down her pen carefully. "What's going on?" "Thaddeus isn't telling you everything." Evangeline placed a thumb drive on the table. "These are internal documents about the Rainier project and the land dispute. There's more at stake than he's admitted." The sudden alliance was so unexpected that Delphine could only stare. "Why are you helping me?" Evangeline's carefully maintained facade cracked further, revealing something vulnerable beneath her polished exterior. I've worked for Thaddeus for 7 years. I've seen him build this company through brilliance and sheer force of will, but this situation, she hesitated. It's changing him. There's a desperation I've never seen before. She glanced at the dead camera. And then there's what happened to the last translator. Delphine felt a chill. What translator? Before the linguistics professors and cryptographers, there was a Cherokee scholar from Duke, Dr. Adair. He worked on the code for 3 days, then suddenly left, refusing all contact. Thaddeus said he was incompetent, but Evangeline's manicured fingers tapped nervously on the table. I saw his face when he left. He looked frightened. The implications settled heavily in the room. You think the code revealed something that scared him off? I think, Evangeline said carefully, that you should have all available information before proceeding further. Whatever's in those mountains, it's not just about land titles. She moved toward the door, then paused. My grandmother used to say that when you stand at the crossroads of 2 worlds, you must be careful which voices you heed. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Maybe our grandmothers would have understood each other after all. After Evangeline left, Delphine stared at the thumb drive, weighing her options. Accessing it would violate her agreement with Thaddeus, potentially jeopardizing her position and the substantial payment promised upon completion. Yet the growing sense that she was being used as a tool in a larger game she didn't fully comprehend pushed her toward risk. That evening, after her cleaning shift, she sat in her car in the deserted parking garage and plugged the drive into her laptop. The documents confirmed Evangeline's warnings. The Rainier project wasn't merely a corporate expansion, but a massive development that would transform a significant portion of Seattle's waterfront, generating billions in profit for Horizon and its investors. The land title issue wasn't a minor legal hurdle, but a fundamental challenge that could collapse the entire venture. More disturbing were emails between Thaddeus and the company's legal team discussing contingency measures if the documents couldn't be located or didn't provide the evidence needed. The clinical language couldn't disguise the implication. They were prepared to take whatever steps necessary to secure the project's future. As Delphine drove home through rain-slicked streets, the city lights reflecting in blurred constellations on the wet pavement, she felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy pressing against her chest. She was no longer merely translating an academic curiosity. She was potentially uncovering evidence that powerful people might prefer remained buried. The next morning, a new presence awaited in her research room. A tall, rail-thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the rumpled appearance of an academic pulled reluctantly from his natural habitat. Phineas Blackwood, he introduced himself, extending a bony hand. Archaeoastronomer from the University of Washington. Mr. Remington has asked me to assist with the celestial navigation aspects of your work. Despite her initial wariness of this corporate-appointed assistant, Delphine soon discovered an unexpected ally in Phineas. His enthusiasm for pre-Columbian astronomical knowledge was genuine, his respect for indigenous science evident in the way he handled her grandmother's journals with reverence rather than academic detachment. Fascinating system, he murmured on their second day working together, examining the star charts she had compiled. They were tracking not just the obvious constellations, but subtle celestial events, conjunctions, occultations, meteor showers, and integrating them into a complex wayfinding mechanism. My grandmother called it reading the sky road, Delphine explained. She said our ancestors navigated by understanding how stars breathe through seasons. Phineas looked up, genuine respect in his eyes. That's a more elegant description than anything in my academic papers. Their collaboration accelerated her progress significantly. Phineas's sophisticated astronomical software could calculate precise alignments for specific dates, translating the code's celestial references into exact geographical coordinates. By the end of the week, they had mapped a complete route through the Smoky Mountains, leading to what appeared to be a cave system near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. These coordinates align perfectly with the summer solstice of 1791, Phineas explained, pointing to the map they'd created. A significant year, the Treaty of Holston was signed then, establishing boundaries between the United States and the Cherokee Nation. Delphine felt a pulse of recognition. My grandmother mentioned that treaty. She said it was the paper promise that moved like water, never staying where it was placed. As they worked, Delphine became increasingly aware of a presence outside their research room. Ambrose Wheeler, the night security guard whose rounds seemed to bring him past their door with unusual frequency. Unlike the day security team who treated her with professional indifference, Ambrose would often pause, offering a thermos of coffee or simple acknowledgement of their late hours. One evening, as Phineas left for the day and Delphine prepared to resume her cleaning duties, Ambrose lingered in the doorway. "You're making good progress," he observed quietly. Delphine looked up, surprised. "You can tell?" A smile touched his weathered face. "I've worked security here for 22 years. You learn to read people. Your shoulders are different now, like you're carrying something heavy but important." His perception was unsettling. "Have you been watching me?" "I watch everyone, Ms. Clayton. It's my job." He stepped into the room, closing the door partially. "Including Mr. Remington's visitors after hours, like the gentleman from Jenkins' development group last night." Delphine stilled. Jenkins' group, the competitors Thaddeus had mentioned, who were supposedly using heritage claims to block the Rainier project. "They're supposed to be enemies," she said carefully. Ambrose's expression remained neutral. "Supposed enemies meeting at 10 p.m. without assistants or lawyers present. Interesting, isn't it?" He moved toward the door, then paused. "My people came from the same mountains as yours. Different tribe, same respect for the old ways. Some things shouldn't be disturbed just because men in expensive suits want to build taller buildings." With that cryptic statement, he continued his rounds, leaving Delphine with another piece of the increasingly complex puzzle surrounding the mysterious code. That night, as she cleaned the executive washrooms, Delphine caught her reflection in the polished mirrors, a woman transformed by knowledge, yet still wearing the uniform that rendered her invisible. The code was changing her, awakening parts of herself that had long been dormant. Each symbol she translated seemed to translate something within her as well, revealing strength and wisdom she had buried beneath years of practical survival. In the glass, superimposed over her reflection, she could almost see her grandmother's face, the same high cheekbones, the same watchful eyes that missed nothing. Adsila had always told her that true power came not from position, but from understanding one's place in the continuing circle of time. As Seattle's endless rain tapped against the windows like ancestral fingers keeping time, Delphine understood that she was becoming more than just a translator of ancient symbols. She was becoming their guardian, continuing a lineage she had almost forgotten was hers to carry. The breakthrough came on a rare, clear Seattle morning, sunlight streaming through the research room's small window and illuminating the documents spread across the table. Delphine had been working since dawn, cross-referencing the astronomical calculations with her grandmother's journals, when a pattern suddenly emerged. A perfect alignment between the code's directional markers and a star chart in her grandmother's records, dated 1791. "I've got it," she whispered, her fingers tracing the corresponding symbols. "The first part of the code. It's a map to a specific cave in the Smoky Mountains where documents were hidden during the treaty negotiations." Phineas looked up from his computer, eyes wide behind his glasses. "You're certain? The celestial alignments match exactly. And look here." She pointed to a recurring symbol they had been unable to interpret. "It's not a directional marker at all. It's a family mark, my family's mark. The guardians of the documents were my ancestors." The realization settled over her like a mantle of responsibility. Her grandmother's insistence on teaching her the old stories and symbols hadn't been merely cultural preservation. It had been preparation for this moment. By mid-afternoon, they had compiled their findings into a comprehensive report, complete with precise coordinates for the cave location and translations of the accompanying text describing the documents hidden there. When Thaddeus arrived to review their progress, his typical cool composure fractured at the sight of their results. "You actually did it," he said, a hint of genuine amazement breaking through his controlled facade as he examined the coordinates. "Remarkable work, Ms. Clayton." "Delphine deserves full credit," Phineas interjected. "Her knowledge of Cherokee symbolic systems was the key. Without her cultural insights, we'd still be treating this as a standard cryptographic problem, rather than the sophisticated cultural record it is." Thaddeus nodded absently, his attention fixed on the map they'd created. "We need to verify these findings immediately. I'll send a team to these coordinates within the week." "I should be part of that team," Delphine said firmly. "The code indicates the cave entrance is marked with symbols that would be recognizable only to those familiar with Cherokee traditions." A flicker of hesitation crossed Thaddeus's face before he nodded. "Very well. You and Dr. Blackwood will accompany our survey team." He checked his watch. "I need to brief the board immediately. This changes our entire timeline for the Rainier project." After he left, an unexpected weight settled in Delphine's chest. Success should have felt triumphant, yet she found herself wondering if she had served as an unwitting instrument in a larger game whose rules she didn't fully comprehend. That evening, as news of the breakthrough spread through the executive floor, Delphine found herself suddenly visible in a way she had never experienced before. Executives who had previously looked through her now acknowledged her with nods or curious glances. The transformation was disorienting. After 15 years of practiced invisibility, being seen felt almost like a violation. As she finished her evening cleaning duties, Evangeline appeared beside her cart, elegant as always, even at the end of a long day. "Thaddeus has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "He's presenting your findings as a major corporate triumph." Delphine continued wiping down the conference room table, maintaining the appearance of routine. "He seems very certain these documents will support his position." "Too certain," Evangeline agreed. "That's what worries me." She hesitated. "There's something you should know. I checked into Dr. Adair, the Cherokee scholar who left so abruptly. He accepted a position at Oxford University 3 days after leaving here, a position that wasn't advertised, and came with an unusually generous research grant. The implication was clear. You think he was bought off? Or frightened away? Either way, be careful what you reveal going forward." Evangeline straightened her already perfect posture. "Thaddeus is holding a reception tomorrow evening to recognize your contribution. He's calling it a celebration of cross-cultural collaboration." Delphine nearly dropped her cleaning cloth. "A reception? For me? For the project's success, with you as the guest of honor?" Evangeline's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched slightly. "I've taken the liberty of having an appropriate outfit delivered to your apartment. The corporate credit card does have its uses." The gesture was both kind and subtly condescending, a recognition that Delphine wouldn't have appropriate attire for an executive function, yet Evangeline's intentions seemed genuine, a bridge extended across their different worlds. "Thank you," Delphine said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Evangeline replied. Being visible in this company comes with its own dangers. The reception the following evening transformed the austere executive lounge into a showcase of corporate power disguised as celebration. Board members and senior executives mingled over champagne and canapes, while strategically placed easels displayed sanitized versions of Delphine's research, enough to impress without revealing sensitive details. Delphine stood awkwardly near the window, uncomfortable in the borrowed navy silk dress and low heels that Evangeline had selected. Though beautifully cut and undoubtedly expensive, the outfit felt like a costume, another person's skin she was temporarily inhabiting. Thaddeus commanded the center of the room, charming investors with the story of the mysterious code and the unlikely translator who had cracked it. His version cast Horizon Technologies as the hero, a company honoring its historical connections while driving forward innovation. Ms. Clayton's work represents the perfect synthesis of tradition and progress that Horizon stands for, he announced, raising his glass in her direction. Her unique insights have helped us recover historical documentation that will allow the Rainier project to move forward with full respect for the land's heritage. The assembled executives applauded politely, their gazes assessing as they regarded the cleaning woman suddenly in their midst. Delphine felt their curiosity, like a physical touch, invasive, evaluating, calculating her worth beyond her unexpected utility. As the evening progressed, she retreated further into the corner, watching the corporate theater unfold. It was during this quiet observation that she noticed something disturbing. Thaddeus, in intense conversation with a man she recognized from news photos as the CEO of Jenkins Group, their supposed competitors. Their body language suggested not adversaries but conspirators, their expressions serious as they withdrew to a private alcove. "Unexpected alliance," came a quiet voice beside her. Ambrose, the security guard, now dressed in a formal uniform rather than his usual attire, had appeared silently at her side. Why is he meeting with someone he described as his greatest obstacle? Delphine wondered aloud. Men like Remington don't see others as enemies or friends, only as pieces to be moved around the board. Ambrose's gaze remained on the two executives. Jenkins controls the southern parcels needed for the Rainier project. Remington has the political connections to push permits through. Together, they could double their profits. The calculation was cynical, but rang true. And the native land claims? A negotiating tool, most likely, or a shared problem to be eliminated. Ambrose's weathered face revealed nothing, but his voice carried a weight of experience. Be careful with what you've uncovered, Miss Clayton. Some truths are weapons in the wrong hands. As the reception concluded, Thaddeus approached her, riding the confidence of a successful evening. You've exceeded all expectations, Delphine, he said, using her first name for the first time. The expedition team leaves for Tennessee on Monday. I've arranged for your regular duties to be covered. His smile didn't reach his eyes. 1 week from now, the Rainier project will be secure, and you'll have your well-earned bonus. A mutually beneficial conclusion. In the taxi home, still wearing the borrowed finery that felt increasingly like a disguise, Delphine watched Seattle's gleaming towers recede in the window. The code had made her briefly visible in the corporate realm, but at what cost? She had become a tool for powerful interests while still not fully understanding the implications of what she had helped uncover. As the taxi turned onto her modest street, Delphine made a decision. Before the expedition, she needed to know exactly what she was leading Thaddeus toward. And for that, she would need to speak with someone who might have answers, her daughter Cordelia, who worked in Horizon's financial department, and whose silence throughout this entire situation had grown increasingly suspicious. The borrowed silk whispered against her skin as she exited the taxi, a reminder that she was moving between worlds that had never been meant to intersect. Whatever truth awaited in those mountain caves, she was determined to understand its full significance before it was claimed by those who saw heritage as merely another resource to be exploited. The weekend stretched before Delphine like a narrow bridge between worlds. Monday would bring the expedition to the Smoky Mountains, a journey not just across the country, but into her family's past. The weight of this responsibility pressed against her chest as she climbed the stairs to her daughter's downtown apartment early Saturday morning. Cordelia opened the door on the second knock, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to wariness. At 28, she was Delphine in negative, where the mother was soft-spoken, the daughter was assertive. Where Delphine blended into backgrounds, Cordelia commanded attention. Her corporate casual weekend attire, crisp jeans and a cashmere sweater, contrasted sharply with Delphine's worn weekend clothes. "Mom, what are you doing here so early?" She stepped aside to let Delphine enter the sleek apartment that testified to her rapid rise through Horizon's financial department. "We need to talk," Delphine said simply, setting her purse on the minimalist coffee table. "About the code I've been translating for Thaddeus Remington." Cordelia's face remained carefully neutral, but her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "What code?" "Please don't," Delphine said quietly. "I know you work directly with the Rainier Project financials. I know the land dispute threatens the entire venture. And I suspect you know far more about this mysterious document than you're admitting." For a moment, Cordelia maintained her corporate mask, the polished professional persona she had cultivated since college. Then her shoulders slumped slightly, and she sank onto her pristine white sofa. "How much have you translated?" she asked. "Enough to locate the hidden documents." "We leave for the mountains on Monday." Delphine sat across from her daughter, the glass coffee table between them like a transparent barrier. "What I need to know is whether I'm being used to uncover something that should remain hidden." Cordelia stared into her coffee as if reading fortunes in its depths. "It's complicated, Mom." "Then uncomplicate it for me." Her daughter's eyes, so like her own, finally met hers directly. "I was doing a standard audit of historical property acquisitions for the Rainier expansion when I found irregularities in the original land purchases from the 1980s. Properties that should have had clear chains of title back to territorial days had gaps, missing deeds, questionable transfers, particularly around lands that once belonged to indigenous communities." She set her mug down carefully. "When I brought my concerns to the financial director, they were dismissed. Too historical, too irrelevant to current operations. But then I discovered something else, a reference in old company correspondence to original documentation that had been secured through alternative means during the company's founding." "Alternative means?" Delphine repeated. I believe the original founder, Thaddeus's grandfather, obtained documents that proved the land had been properly purchased from Cherokee traders in the territorial period, but kept them hidden because they also contained evidence of other, less favorable transactions. Delphine processed this information carefully. And the code? How did it come into this? Cordelia's expression grew more hesitant. I found a reference to it in the company archives, a description of a native cipher that documented the location of original transaction records. The reference included a partial reproduction of the symbols, which you then sent anonymously to Thaddeus with a threatening note, Delphine concluded, the pieces finally aligning, hoping he would be forced to address the land title issues honestly. Her daughter's silence was confirmation enough. What you couldn't have known, Delphine continued, the weight of revelation settling over her, is that those symbols are part of our family's heritage. The code wasn't just any Cherokee record. It was entrusted specifically to our ancestors for safekeeping. Cordelia's eyes widened. Grandmother's stories, the symbols she used to draw for me when I was little, I never made the connection. Because she shared different parts of our heritage with each of us, Delphine explained. She taught you about persistence and strength. She taught me about keeping records and remembering paths. A heavy silence fell between them, mother and daughter both processing the implications of their unwitting roles in this corporate drama. What will you do now? Cordelia finally asked. Delphine considered the question carefully. I'll go to the mountains as planned. Whatever documents lie hidden there are part of our family's responsibility. But now I'll be prepared for what they might contain. As she left her daughter's apartment, the Seattle skyline gleamed in the rare morning sunlight, glass towers reflecting each other in endless recursion, power mirroring power. The corporate world that had always seemed so impenetrable to her was revealed as merely another human construction built on stories, some true and some carefully crafted to serve particular interests. Monday arrived with disorienting swiftness. The corporate jet waited at a private airfield outside Seattle, its interior a study in understated luxury. Thaddeus greeted Delphine and Phineas at the foot of the boarding stairs, his excitement barely contained beneath his usual polished exterior. Our advance team is already preparing the site based on your coordinates, he explained as they settled into buttery leather seats. Ground-penetrating radar has confirmed a cave system exactly where you predicted. The 5-hour flight provided Delphine with an unexpected window into Thaddeus's character. Away from the corporate environment, a different facet of his personality emerged, more animated when discussing the company's history, more vulnerable when speaking of his grandfather's legacy. My grandfather started with nothing, he told them as they flew over the Midwest. An immigrant with determination and vision, who saw potential where others saw only wilderness. He built Horizon from a single timber operation into what it is today. His voice carried the rehearsed quality of family mythology, stories polished through generations until they gleamed with predestined success. Yet beneath the practiced narrative, Delphine sensed genuine devotion to his family legacy, and genuine fear that it might be tarnished. These documents, he continued, they'll finally silence the critics who've questioned our rightful ownership of the original properties. My grandfather always maintained that every transaction was legitimate, every agreement honored. The conviction in his voice gave Delphine pause. Perhaps Thaddeus truly believed in his family's righteous history. Perhaps he was seeking these documents not to hide truth, but to confirm it. Their arrival in Tennessee brought her abruptly back to the reality of their mission. A convoy of black SUVs met them at the airfield, transporting them into the misty embrace of the Smoky Mountains. As paved roads gave way to gravel and finally to rough forest tracks, Delphine felt the landscape reaching out to her with familiar hands. The same rounded mountains, the same whispering pines that had surrounded her grandmother's cabin. The expedition base camp had been established in a clearing near the coordinates they had identified. Professional-looking people in outdoor gear operated sophisticated equipment, while security personnel maintained a perimeter. It resembled a military operation more than an archaeological expedition. We've identified an opening in the cliff face that matches your description, the lead geologist explained, pointing to a topographical display. It was hidden behind vegetation and would have been nearly impossible to locate without precise coordinates. As the team prepared for the final approach, Delphine found herself standing slightly apart, absorbing the familiar scents of mountain soil and pine. This land had known her ancestors. It held their footsteps in its memory. Whatever modern drama was unfolding here, the mountains themselves remained witnesses to a longer, deeper history. Phineas joined her, his academic excitement tempered by respect for her evident emotional connection to the place. "Ready for the final stage of our treasure hunt?" he asked gently. "It's not treasure we're seeking," Delphine replied. "It's truth. And those aren't always the same thing." The path to the cave entrance required an hour's hike up increasingly steep terrain. Delphine moved with surprising sureness, her body remembering rhythms of mountain walking that her urban life had suppressed. Thaddeus, despite his expensive hiking gear, struggled with the altitude and incline, his face flushed with exertion and anticipation. When they finally reached the ledge indicated by the code, anticipation rippled through the group. Vegetation had been cleared to reveal a narrow fissure in the granite face, barely wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. Above the opening, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for them, were weathered symbols carved into the stone, a spiral surrounded by 7 marks, the same pattern that appeared on her grandmother's blanket. "Those are the guardian signs," Delphine explained, touching the ancient carvings gently. "They mark a place of protected knowledge." Thaddeus stared at the symbols, momentarily humbled by their antiquity. "After all this time," he murmured. "My grandfather said the papers were secured somewhere safe, but I never imagined." The team's lights illuminated a narrow passage beyond the entrance, leading downward into the mountain's heart. As they prepared to enter, Delphine felt a curious doubling of time. She was both here now, a cleaning woman turned codebreaker on a corporate expedition, and simultaneously connected to generations of her ancestors who had preserved knowledge in these hidden places, keeping their own records when others would have written them out of history. The cave narrowed before opening into a small chamber where the air was surprisingly dry and still. Their lights revealed not the raw natural cave Delphine had expected, but a carefully constructed repository. Flat stones formed shelves along the walls, and in the center stood a stone table of sorts, its surface worn smooth by time or human touch. On this table rested a metal box, green with age but intact, secured with a lock that had long since fused shut with corrosion. "Incredible," breathed Phineas, examining the chamber with academic wonder. "A purpose-built archive, protected from moisture and temperature fluctuations. Your ancestors were remarkable preservationists." Thaddeus approached the box with reverence and undisguised eagerness. "This must be it, the documentation my grandfather referenced." As the team's archaeologist carefully examined the box, determining how to open it without damaging the contents, Delphine noticed something the others had overlooked: additional symbols carved into the chamber's back wall, partially hidden by shadows. She moved closer, her flashlight revealing a message left specifically for the box's retriever. The symbols were clear to her now, after weeks of immersion in the code. "The truth serves neither hawk nor crow, but the land itself. Choose wisely which stories are told, Guardian." A warning from her ancestors, a reminder of responsibility that transcended family lines or corporate interests. Whatever the box contained, it wasn't meant to serve any single agenda, but a larger truth that honored the land and its complex history of inhabitation. As the archaeologist finally opened the corroded box with delicate tools, revealing bundled papers inside, Delphine felt the weight of that responsibility settle around her shoulders. She was no longer merely translating a code, she had become its newest guardian, with all the moral complexity that role entailed. The expedition team gathered around as the first documents were carefully removed from their protective wrappings. Land deeds, trading agreements, and personal correspondence dating back to the late 18th century, preserved with remarkable care across generations. Thaddeus leaned forward, his composure cracking with anticipation. What do they say? Do they confirm the legal purchases? The documents would indeed tell their story, but whose truth they would serve remained to be seen. As Seattle's corporate interests and her family's ancestral responsibility collided in this mountain chamber, Delphine understood that the real translation work was only just beginning. The mountain seemed to hold its breath as the archaeologist carefully laid out the documents on a portable table, her gloved hands treating each yellowed page with reverence. The team's lights cast dramatic shadows across the cave walls, turning everyone's faces into masks of light and darkness. Thaddeus hovered at the archaeologist's shoulder, his customary poise abandoned in the face of what he clearly believed was vindication waiting to be revealed. "Well?" he pressed. "What do they say?" "Patience, please," the woman responded, without looking up. "These are extremely fragile. Some appear to be in English, others in Cherokee syllabary, and there are several that combine both writing systems." Delphine stood slightly apart, a curious calm settling over her. In this ancestral space, with the mountain's ancient presence surrounding them, the corporate urgency seemed suddenly trivial, a momentary flutter against the backdrop of geological time. "I can help with the Cherokee documents," she offered quietly. The archaeologist nodded gratefully while Thaddeus shot her a look that mingled hope with warning. He wanted translation, but feared what she might find. The first document was a formal deed of sale dated 1794, written in the flowery legal English of the period. It detailed the purchase of a significant tract of land along what would later become part of Seattle's waterfront, from authorized representatives of the Trading Alliance of the Cherokee and Coast Salish peoples, by Jonathan Remington, Thaddeus's great-great-grandfather. "This appears to be a legitimate sale," the archaeologist confirmed, "properly witnessed and recorded according to territorial law of the time." Thaddeus's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Just as my grandfather always maintained, legal acquisition, fair price." But as Delphine began examining the accompanying Cherokee documents, a more complex narrative emerged. The syllabary text wasn't merely a translation of the English deed, but a separate record-keeping system, one that documented not just this single transaction, but its context within a larger pattern of negotiations and relationships. "This isn't just a deed," she explained, carefully translating the flowing symbols. "It's a comprehensive record of the trading relationship between the Cherokee traders who had established exchange rights with the Coast Salish communities and the Remington family." She continued reading, her voice growing quieter as the true significance of the documents revealed itself. According to this record, the land sale was legitimate, but conditionally so. The Cherokee traders, acting as intermediaries with the permission of local tribes, included specific provisions about how the land could be used and developed. Thaddeus's expression tightened. "What kind of provisions?" "Restrictions on development that would damage salmon spawning grounds, requirements to preserve certain sacred sites, profit-sharing arrangements for any resources extracted beyond subsistence use." Delphine looked up from the documents. "The deed your ancestor signed acknowledged these conditions, but they don't appear in the English version filed with territorial authorities. The implications hung in the air like the dust disturbed by their presence. The land had been legally purchased, as Thaddeus had always claimed, but with conditions that had never been honored or even acknowledged in the official American records. These differences in the documents," Phineas began cautiously, "were deliberate," Delphine finished. "My ancestors created a dual record-keeping system because they didn't trust the American legal documents to preserve the full terms of the agreement. They maintained their own records in a writing system few outsiders could read, hidden where only those who knew the code could find them." Thaddeus's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "These conditions, they can't possibly be binding after all this time." "The statute of limitations." "This isn't just about legal technicalities," Delphine interrupted, a new certainty in her voice. "This is about the truth of how your family's fortune began, not through deception, as some might have feared, but through a complex agreement that acknowledged mutual benefit and responsibility." She carefully lifted another document from the box, this one newer, dating from the 1890s. "And here's something else interesting. A letter from your grandfather, acknowledging his awareness of the original conditions and expressing his intention to honor them in his own way." Thaddeus took the letter with trembling hands, reading his grandfather's flowing script, with naked emotion on his face. The letter revealed a man wrestling with the complexities of honoring ancestral agreements while building a modern business, not a villain, but a complex figure navigating the contradictions of American expansion. "He knew," Thaddeus whispered. "All this time the family knew about these conditions, and chose which parts of the story to preserve in company mythology," Delphine added gently, "just as my family chose to preserve the complete record, waiting for a time when it might be heard." The cave seemed to grow smaller as the implications expanded. The documents neither completely vindicated nor condemned the Remington legacy. Instead, they complicated it, humanized it, revealed it as one strand in a more intricate historical tapestry. For Thaddeus, whose identity was so thoroughly entwined with his family's narrative of righteous entrepreneurship, this nuanced truth appeared profoundly disorienting. His carefully maintained corporate mask slipped entirely, revealing genuine confusion and vulnerability beneath. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked, more to himself than the others. "The Rainier project is months into development, hundreds of millions already invested." Delphine regarded him with unexpected compassion. "You have an opportunity few are given to acknowledge the full truth of your heritage and choose how to honor it going forward." As the team carefully packed the documents for transportation back to Seattle, tension radiated from Thaddeus. The simple narrative he had expected, documents proving his family's rightful ownership, had instead yielded a more challenging truth that demanded response rather than merely justifying the status quo. During the helicopter flight back to their base camp, Delphine found herself seated beside a strangely silent Thaddeus. The corporate titan seemed diminished somehow, his certainties shaken by historical complexities he had never been forced to confront. "My grandfather used to talk about a debt we owed," he said finally, staring out at the mountain landscape below. "I always thought he meant we should give back through standard corporate philanthropy, scholarships, museum donations, the usual tax-deductible gestures." He turned to look at her directly. "But he meant something more substantive, didn't he?" "The documents suggest he understood the conditional nature of the original purchase," Delphine replied carefully, "and recognized that simply owning the land legally didn't absolve the family of ongoing responsibilities to it, and the communities connected to it." Thaddeus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "I need time to process this, to reconsider certain aspects of the Rainier project." That evening at the local hotel where the team was staying before their return to Seattle, Delphine sat alone on her balcony, watching darkness settle over the mountains of her ancestors. The weight of the day's discoveries pressed against her chest, not oppressively but like a mantle of responsibility carefully placed upon shoulders prepared to bear it. Her phone chimed with a text from Cordelia. "Well, what did you find?" Delphine considered how to respond, aware of the complex emotions her daughter would feel upon learning that her corporate whistleblowing had uncovered not corporate villainy, but a more nuanced historical truth. Finally, she typed, "Neither what Thaddeus feared nor what he hoped for. Something more human than either. We'll talk when I'm home." As she set the phone down, a soft knock came at her door. Evangeline stood in the hallway, her usual perfect grooming slightly disheveled from travel. "Thaddeus sent me to deliver this," she said, handing Delphine an envelope. "He's in meetings with the legal team, reassessing the Rainier development plans." Inside the envelope was a bank check for $75,000, 50% more than the agreed-upon payment, and a handwritten note, "For services that exceeded all expectations and truths that exceeded all preparations." "This is not the end of our conversation about how to move forward honorably." Evangeline watched her reaction carefully. "He's been on video calls for hours with the board, the Jenkins Group, and representatives from the Coast Salish Heritage Foundation. I've never seen him like this, simultaneously shaken and energized." "The documents don't invalidate his family's claim to the land," Delphine explained, "but they do reveal obligations that were part of the original purchase, obligations that were systematically erased from the official American records, but preserved in my family's Cherokee record-keeping." Evangeline leaned against the doorframe, her professional mask momentarily lowered. "You've changed him, you know. Changed this whole situation in ways I wouldn't have thought possible." A small smile touched her lips. "Changed me too, if I'm being honest." After Evangeline left, Delphine returned to the balcony, letting the mountain air fill her lungs. The check in her hand represented security she had never known, freedom from financial precarity, proper care for her mother, perhaps even a small house of her own. Yet it felt almost incidental compared to the deeper value of what she had helped uncover. Not just historical documents, but a more complete truth about how the past continues to shape the present through stories told and untold. Her grandmother had once told her that wisdom comes not from having all the answers, but from asking better questions. The documents from the cave didn't provide neat resolution to contemporary conflicts over land and development. Instead, they invited more thoughtful engagement with the complex legacies all Americans inherit. As stars appeared above the ancient mountains, Delphine felt a curious peace settle over her. Whatever happened with the Rainier project, whatever decisions Thaddeus ultimately made about honoring his family's unacknowledged obligations, she had fulfilled her role as guardian of the code. She had ensured that voices long silenced were finally heard, that records carefully preserved across generations had fulfilled their purpose. The mountains kept their ancient silence around her, neither judging nor absolving, simply witnessing one more turn in the long spiral of human stories they had cradled for millennia. The return to Seattle brought Delphine back to a life that no longer quite fit. Her apartment seemed smaller, its walls too confining after the expansive mountain vistas. Her cleaning routine, once a comforting rhythm, now felt like muscle memory without purpose. She moved through her shifts mechanically, aware of subtle changes in how others perceived her, curious glances from executives who had previously looked through her, uncertain deference from fellow cleaning staff who didn't know how to categorize her anymore. A week passed in this liminal state. The documents from the cave had been transferred to a secure research facility where a team of historians, legal experts, and tribal representatives were carefully analyzing their contents and implications. Thaddeus had disappeared into a series of closed-door meetings, emerging occasionally looking simultaneously exhausted and animated, a man wrestling with profound reconsideration. On Friday afternoon, as Delphine wiped down the mirrors in the executive washroom, Evangeline found her. "Thaddeus would like to see you," she said, her professional tone softened by what might have been respect. "He's made some decisions about the Rainier project." The executive floor hummed with unusual energy as Delphine followed Evangeline down corridors she had previously only traversed with cleaning supplies. Staff moved with purpose, conference rooms buzzed with voices, and an atmosphere of realignment pervaded the space, as if the entire corporate organism was adjusting to a significant shift in direction. Thaddeus's office had been transformed into a war room of sorts, with architectural plans spread across multiple surfaces and digital renderings projected on wall screens. The man himself stood at the center of this controlled chaos, directing changes with the precision of a conductor. He looked up as Delphine entered, and for the first time in their acquaintance met her eyes directly, without the veil of hierarchy that had always hung between them. "Miss Clayton, Delphine," he corrected himself. "Thank you for coming. I wanted you to be among the first to see the revised Rainier project." He gestured toward the largest rendering, which showed a dramatically different development than the gleaming corporate complex previously planned. The new design incorporated extensive green spaces, restored waterfront habitats, and what appeared to be a cultural center, prominently positioned at the heart of the development. "We're completely reimagining the project, based on the original conditions in the documents you helped recover," Thaddeus explained, an unexpected passion animating his usually controlled demeanor. "The Coast Salish Heritage Foundation is now a full partner. 30% of the development will be dedicated to ecological restoration, with particular emphasis on salmon habitat. The cultural center will showcase both indigenous history and the complex story of Seattle's development." Delphine studied the renderings carefully. "This is a significant change, a necessary one," Thaddeus replied, "not just legally, but morally. My grandfather understood the conditional nature of our claim to the land, even if he never fully honored it. I have an opportunity to correct that historical evasion." His transformation seemed genuine, not the calculated pivot of a corporate strategist, but the evolution of a man confronting inherited complexities with newfound clarity. Yet beneath his enthusiasm, Delphine sensed lingering uncertainty. "The board is on board with these changes?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Not entirely. There will be battles ahead. The Jenkins Group has pulled out entirely, claiming we've gone soft. Several board members are threatening legal action, arguing that these changes violate fiduciary responsibility." He straightened his shoulders. "But I'm prepared for those fights. What I wasn't prepared for was the personal reckoning these documents forced upon me. I've spent my life believing a particular story about my family's legacy, only to discover it was significantly incomplete." The vulnerability in this admission was startling from a man who had built his reputation on unwavering certainty. Delphine felt an unexpected kinship with him in that moment. They were both navigating identities altered by historical revelations, both trying to honor truths that complicated their understanding of themselves. "I have a proposition for you," Thaddeus continued. "Horizon is establishing a new department focused on historical and cultural integration for all our development projects. We need someone who understands both corporate structures and indigenous perspectives to lead it. Someone who can translate between different ways of seeing and valuing the world." The implication hung in the air between them. Delphine felt momentarily unmoored. This wasn't a trajectory she had ever imagined for herself. A 56-year-old woman who had spent decades cleaning the offices she might now help direct. "Why me?" she asked simply. "Because you've already proven you can do what no one else could. Decode complex cultural systems that others couldn't begin to understand. Because you move between worlds with an awareness few possess." Thaddeus met her gaze directly. "And because you had the integrity to present the complete truth of those documents, not just the parts that served any particular agenda. The offer was tempting. Recognition, influence, financial security beyond anything she had known. Yet something in Delphine hesitated, sensing that acceptance would irrevocably alter her place in the world, severing connections to aspects of her identity she wasn't prepared to relinquish. "I need time to consider," she said finally. Thaddeus nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. The position will remain open until you decide." As she left his office, moving through corridors populated by people who now nodded in acknowledgement where they had once looked through her, Delphine felt the weight of choice pressing against her chest. The code had transformed not just Thaddeus and the Rainier project, but her own place in the carefully stratified world she had navigated invisibly for so long. That evening she met Cordelia for dinner at a small restaurant halfway between their disparate worlds. Not the corporate establishments her daughter typically frequented, nor the simple diners Delphine preferred, but a middle ground where both could feel moderately comfortable. "He offered you what?" Cordelia exclaimed when Delphine described Thaddeus's proposal. "Director of Historical and Cultural Integration? That's executive level, Mom. Corner office, 6-figure salary, actual power." Delphine nodded, watching steam rise from her tea like mountain mist. Power to influence how Horizon approaches development, how it honors historical obligations, how it relates to communities typically excluded from corporate decision-making. "Then why aren't you celebrating? This is exactly the kind of recognition you've always deserved." Cordelia studied her mother's face with growing understanding. "Unless you're not sure you want it. I've spent my life observing from the margins," Delphine explained carefully. "There's a particular kind of knowledge that comes from that position, seeing patterns others miss, understanding systems from below rather than above. If I move to the center, I might lose that perspective." Cordelia considered this with unexpected thoughtfulness. "You're worried about becoming what you've spent your life cleaning up after." "Not exactly," Delphine smiled faintly. "More that I'm uncertain whether I can translate what I know into a language the corporate world can truly hear and value. Whether the wisdom I've gained from invisibility can survive becoming visible." Later that night, in her apartment, Delphine spread her grandmother's blanket across her bed, its woven symbols a tangible connection to generations of women who had preserved knowledge through changing times. She traced the patterns with her fingertips, seeking guidance across the years. Her grandmother had often told her that true power came not from position, but from understanding one's place in the continuing circle of time, knowing when to step forward and when to stand aside, when to speak and when to listen, when to preserve and when to transform. As Seattle's endless rain tapped against her windows, Delphine confronted the central question that had emerged from the code's unraveling. Was her responsibility to her heritage best served by maintaining the watchful position on the margins that her ancestors had occupied, or by stepping into the center where decisions were made, carrying their wisdom into spaces where it had been systematically excluded? The symbols offered no simple answer, just as the cave documents had provided no neat resolution to contemporary conflicts over land and development. Instead, they invited deeper engagement with complexity, with the understanding that wisdom often lies not in certainty, but in the willingness to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Sleep eluded her as she contemplated the crossroads before her. A cleaning woman offered unexpected elevation, a guardian of ancestral knowledge invited into the very systems that had historically devalued that knowledge. Somewhere between acceptance and refusal lay a third path, one that might honor both her heritage and the unexpected opportunities the code had revealed. Outside her window, Seattle's towers gleamed in the night, monuments to a particular kind of progress built upon land with longer, deeper histories than their architects had acknowledged. Whatever decision she made would become part of that ongoing story, not its conclusion, but another turn in the spiral of relationship between people and place, past and future, visibility and shadow. Monday morning found Delphine in an unfamiliar position, sitting in Thaddeus Remington's outer office, awaiting a scheduled appointment rather than arriving before dawn to empty his trash and polish his desk. She smoothed the skirt of her newly purchased business attire, the fabric still stiff with newness against her skin. Evangeline offered her a genuine smile, a far cry from the cool assessment of their first encounters. "He'll be with you shortly." The board meeting ran long. "Good long or bad long?" Delphine asked. "Transformative long," Evangeline replied cryptically. "Things are changing around here in ways no one anticipated." When Thaddeus finally emerged from his inner office, he looked simultaneously exhausted and energized, a man who had fought difficult battles but believed in their purpose. He gestured Delphine inside, closing the door on the corporate hum beyond. "Have you considered my offer?" he asked without preamble, settling behind his desk. Delphine nodded, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "I have, and I've come to a decision that might surprise you." She drew a deep breath, centering herself in the certainty that had come to her during a pre-dawn moment of clarity. "I can't accept the position as offered. Not because I don't value the opportunity, but because it wouldn't serve the purpose we both now understand is important." Thaddeus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Explain." "The documents we discovered revealed not just historical facts, but a methodology, a way of maintaining dual knowledge systems, of preserving perspectives that official records excluded." Delphine leaned forward slightly. "If I simply step into an executive role, I become part of the same hierarchical structure that historically marginalized indigenous knowledge. I'd be elevated individually without changing the system itself." Understanding dawned in Thaddeus's expression. "You're not rejecting the position. You're proposing to reimagine it." "Exactly. Instead of a traditional directorship, I propose establishing a council that brings together multiple knowledge keepers, tribal elders, academic historians, community representatives, and corporate stakeholders. Not a department I would head, but a collaborative body that would work across traditional boundaries." She continued with growing confidence, articulating the vision that had crystallized during her nights of reflection. "This council would review all major Horizon projects, not just Rainier, ensuring that historical obligations and community impacts are considered from the earliest planning stages. I would serve as facilitator rather than director, maintaining connections between worlds rather than being fully absorbed into corporate hierarchy." Thaddeus steepled his fingers, considering her proposal with the focused attention he typically reserved for high-stakes negotiations. "You're suggesting a structural change to how Horizon operates, not just a new department." "Yes, because what those documents truly revealed wasn't just specific historical agreements, but the failure of conventional corporate structures to honor complex historical truths." Delphine met his gaze steadily. "My grandmother used to say that when wisdom speaks, it requires not just different words but different ways of listening." A slow smile spread across Thaddeus's face, not the calculated expression he deployed in board meetings, but something more genuine. "You continue to surprise me, Delphine Clayton." "Is that a yes?" "It's a, let's figure out how to make this work." He reached for a notepad, suddenly animated. "We'd need charter language that gives the council genuine authority while maintaining necessary corporate governance, budget allocations that can't be easily cut during downturns, direct reporting lines to executive leadership." As they began sketching the framework for this unprecedented entity, Delphine felt a profound shift in their relationship. No longer employer and employee, not quite equals in the conventional sense, but collaborators in reimagining how historical knowledge could inform contemporary corporate practice. The weeks that followed unfolded with dizzying intensity. The Heritage Council, as it came to be called, took shape through careful negotiation with stakeholders, ranging from tribal governments to corporate lawyers. Delphine found herself in conference rooms and community centers alike, translating between different ways of valuing land, time, and progress. The revised Rainier project became the first major initiative under the Council's guidance. Architectural plans evolved to incorporate indigenous design principles alongside cutting-edge sustainability features. Archaeological assessments of the site expanded to include oral histories and traditional ecological knowledge. Profit-sharing structures were established with descendant communities of those named in the original agreements. Throughout this transformation, Delphine maintained a curious, dual identity. 3 days a week, she facilitated council meetings in business attire, her voice growing more confident in executive settings. But 2 evenings a week, she continued her cleaning shifts, maintaining connections with the staff, who kept Horizon functioning at its most fundamental level. Some executives found this arrangement bewildering or even inappropriate. A council facilitator shouldn't also clean offices, they argued. But Thaddeus, to his credit, defended her choice. Ms. Clayton's unique perspective comes precisely from her ability to move between worlds others consider separate, he told the board. That's the whole point of what we're trying to build here. On a rainy Thursday evening, as Delphine wiped down the conference room table where she had earlier facilitated a council meeting, she found Phineas waiting by the door, his academic awkwardness unchanged despite his new role as the council's historical consultant. "I've been analyzing the remaining untranslated sections of the code," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "There's something you should see." In the small research room where their work had begun months earlier, Phineas spread out his findings, detailed analysis of symbols they had initially set aside as secondary to the main directional code. "These weren't just decorative elements or authenticating marks as we thought," he explained excitedly. "They're a separate layer of information, a record of family lineages responsible for maintaining different aspects of the knowledge system." He pointed to a particular spiral pattern. "This symbol identifies your maternal line specifically, the women tasked with preserving the entire code across generations. Not just the locations of documents, but the methodology of dual record-keeping itself." Delphine traced the symbol with her finger, feeling an electric connection to generations of women who had carried this responsibility before her. "My grandmother never explicitly told me this was our family's role." "Perhaps she was waiting for the right moment," Phineas suggested. "Or perhaps she understood that some knowledge reveals itself only when needed." This revelation settled over Delphine like a mantle of responsibility, not heavy, but clarifying. Her decision to create the council rather than accept individual elevation hadn't been merely a personal preference. It had been an unconscious continuation of her family's historical role as maintainers of multiple knowledge systems, preservers of perspectives that official records excluded. The next morning she shared these findings with Thaddeus, who received them with characteristic intensity. "Your family has been maintaining alternative corporate records for centuries," he observed with a hint of irony. "Long before corporations as we know them existed." "Not alternative," Delphine corrected gently. "Complementary, different ways of knowing that together create a more complete truth." Thaddeus nodded thoughtfully. "Like the dual perspectives we're now building into Horizon's decision-making processes." "Exactly. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does offer patterns we can learn from." As autumn deepened toward winter, Seattle's persistent rain gave way to occasional snow that transformed the city's angular architecture into something softer, more organic. The Heritage Council gained national attention as an innovative model for corporate community collaboration, with other companies beginning to explore similar approaches. For Delphine personally, the changes were both profound and subtle. The substantial payment from the code translation, combined with her new council salary, allowed her to move her mother to a better care facility and purchase a small house near Cordelia's apartment. Yet she found herself maintaining many of her previous habits, rising before dawn, observing the city wake from quiet streets, preserving the watchfulness that had defined her life. On the winter solstice, a date that had featured prominently in the ancestral code's astronomical systems, she visited her mother at the memory care facility, bringing her grandmother's woven blanket as a tangible connection to their shared past. Eleanor Clayton was having one of her increasingly rare lucid days, her eyes clear as they focused on her daughter. "You look different," she observed, touching Delphine's face with papery fingers. standing taller. "A lot has changed, Mom," Delphine acknowledged, spreading the blanket across her mother's lap. "I've been learning about our family history, about grandmother's traditions." Eleanor's fingers found the spiral pattern unconsciously, tracing it with the muscle memory of someone who had seen the gesture performed countless times. "She always said you'd be the one to remember when it mattered." This simple statement, offered without elaboration, confirmed what Delphine had begun to suspect, that her role as guardian of the code hadn't been accidental, but prepared for, even if that preparation had been subtle, embedded in stories and family practices, rather than explicit instruction. "I'm trying to honor her ways," Delphine said softly, "to keep different kinds of knowledge alive together." Her mother nodded, momentary clarity illuminating her gaze. "That's the Clayton women's work. Always has been. Not just knowing things ourselves, but making sure different ways of knowing can speak to each other." As twilight gathered outside, bringing the year's longest night, Delphine sat with her mother in companionable silence, the woven blanket connecting them to generations of women who had preserved knowledge through changing times, not by standing against transformation, but by ensuring that what was valuable in the past could find new forms in the present. The code that had begun as a mysterious threat had revealed itself as something far more significant. Not just a historical puzzle, but a methodology for navigating between worlds, for maintaining truth in its complexity rather than reducing it to a single authoritative narrative. As her mother drifted towards sleep, Delphine whispered the Cherokee blessing her grandmother had taught her, words that honored the continuing circle of time and knowledge. "May you walk in beauty, with beauty before you, beauty behind you, beauty above you, beauty below you, beauty all around you. In beauty it is finished." Outside, Seattle's modern towers gleamed against the winter sky, while beneath them, the land held older stories in its patience. Delphine Clayton, once invisible cleaner of corporate spaces, now stood at the intersection of these narratives, not their owner but their keeper, ensuring that multiple truths could flow together like streams toward a more complete understanding. Spring arrived in Seattle with characteristic subtlety, not in dramatic bursts of color, but in the gradual softening of rain from winter's icy needles to gentler veils that coaxed dormant life from soil and branch. Cherry trees along the waterfront, unfurled pale blossoms that drifted like snow across the construction site of the reimagined Rainier project, where concrete foundations were being poured according to plans that honored both modern engineering and ancient relationships to the land. 6 months had passed since the code's translation, months of transformation that had reshaped Horizon Technologies almost as dramatically as it had altered Delphine's life. The Heritage Council had evolved from experimental initiative to essential corporate function, its collaborative methodology proving unexpectedly effective at navigating complex challenges beyond historical reconciliation. On this particular morning, Delphine stood at the construction site beside Thaddeus, watching workers install a series of rain gardens designed to filter stormwater through native plantings before it reached the Sound. Her position as council facilitator had gradually earned her the respect of executives who had once looked through her, not through dramatic assertions of authority, but through the quiet persistence of necessary wisdom. "The Jenkins Group has requested a meeting," Thaddeus said, breaking their contemplative silence. "They want to discuss rejoining the project under the new framework." Delphine raised an eyebrow. "The same executives who called your revised plans sentimental environmentalism that sacrifices shareholder value on the altar of political correctness." Thaddeus smiled faintly. "The very same. Turns out, our community engagement approach has generated so much positive press and political goodwill that they're concerned about being left behind. 3 other developers have approached us about implementing similar models." This vindication might have prompted smugness in the old Thaddeus, but the man beside her had been humbled by historical revelations and tempered by the difficult work of transformation. His corporate brilliance remained, but it was now guided by a more nuanced understanding of success. "The council should review their proposal," Delphine suggested, "with particular attention to their actual commitment versus publicity seeking." Their conversation was interrupted by Phineas, hurrying across the muddy site with uncharacteristic urgency, a tablet clutched in his hands. "We've completed the final translations," he announced breathlessly. The symbolic patterns we thought were purely decorative in the corner of the main document. They're actually a key to a second hidden repository. Delphine and Thaddeus exchanged surprised glances. "Another cave?" Thaddeus asked. "No," Phineas replied, eyes bright with discovery. "According to our analysis, it refers to documents hidden much closer, somewhere on or near the original Horizon property itself. The code suggests the Cherokee traders who negotiated with Remington's ancestor left a duplicate set of records buried at the site of the transaction. The implications rippled between them. The documents recovered from the Smoky Mountains had provided enough evidence to justify the Rainier Project's transformation, but questions remained about specific boundaries and usage rights. A second repository might offer even greater clarity. The original transaction would have taken place near Pioneer Square, Thaddeus mused, where our first corporate offices stood until the 1960s. "Not exactly," Phineas corrected, consulting his notes. "The code references where waters meet beneath sentinel trees, which historical maps suggest was slightly northeast of the current downtown, near what's now the Horizon Memorial Garden." Delphine felt a pulse of recognition. The Memorial Garden, a small green space preserved at Thaddeus's insistence when the main campus was modernized a decade earlier, ostensibly to honor the company's founders. She had cleaned its stone benches hundreds of times, occasionally wondering why this modest space warranted such protection amid valuable real estate. "I know that garden," she said quietly. "There's an old cedar at its center that predates European settlement. The landscapers have special instructions never to disturb its root system." Thaddeus's expression shifted as connections formed. "My grandfather was adamant about preserving that tree when the campus was first developed. Family tradition, he called it." His voice softened with realization. He knew, all along he knew something was buried there. Within hours, a discreet archaeological team had been assembled. The Heritage Council convened an emergency session, inviting tribal representatives to determine appropriate protocols for examining what might be culturally significant materials. By evening, careful excavation had begun in a cordoned-off section of the garden, proceeding with meticulous attention to both archaeological standards and cultural respect. Delphine remained on site throughout the process, her dual role as council facilitator and code guardian making her presence essential. As floodlights illuminated the careful work extending into night, she found herself standing beside Evangeline, whose immaculate corporate attire seemed incongruous amid the gradually deepening excavation. "Quite a journey from that first day in the research room," Evangeline observed, offering Delphine a cup of coffee from her thermos. "From invisible to indispensable," Delphine agreed with a small smile. "Though I suspect I was never quite as invisible as people thought. Just looking from a different angle." Evangeline nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, how much we miss by assuming certain perspectives don't matter." She gestured toward the executive building gleaming behind them. "I spent years believing success meant climbing that particular ladder, fitting myself into spaces designed for men like Thaddeus." "And now?" Delphine asked. A smile touched Evangeline's perfect lipstick. "Now I'm considering what other forms of influence might look like. The council model you've created, it's changing how power operates here, not just who holds it." Shortly after midnight, the excavation team's careful work revealed a small metal box nestled among the ancient cedar's roots, protected by layers of oiled leather and birch bark that had preserved it remarkably well, despite nearly 2 centuries underground. Unlike the cave repository, this box was not locked but sealed with wax impressed with a symbol Delphine immediately recognized, the same spiral pattern that appeared on her grandmother's blanket and marked her family's lineage in the code. The ancestral connection was unmistakable, sending a shiver of recognition down her spine. As tribal representatives and archaeological experts gathered around, the box was carefully opened, revealing documents similar to those found in the mountain cave, but with significant differences. Where the cave documents had focused on the legal aspects of land transactions, these contained detailed maps showing indigenous place names, seasonal resource areas, and specific sites designated for protection regardless of ownership changes. Most significantly, they included what appeared to be a covenant signed by Jonathan Remington, acknowledging that while he was purchasing legal rights recognized by American authorities, He also accepted responsibility for maintaining certain relationships with the land itself, protecting salmon streams, preserving ceremonial sites, ensuring continued access for traditional harvesting. "This isn't just a historical curiosity," explained Dr. Winona Jefferson, the tribal historic preservation officer who had been carefully examining the documents. Under contemporary legal frameworks, these types of covenants can have enduring validity, especially when there's evidence they've been acknowledged by subsequent generations. All eyes turned to Thaddeus, whose family had indeed maintained certain aspects of these commitments, preserving the cedar tree, establishing conservation easements along waterfront portions of their properties, even while forgetting their original purpose. "My grandfather used to say that certain obligations transcend paper agreements," he said quietly. "I always thought he was being poetically vague. Now I understand he was trying to pass on knowledge he himself had received in fragments." As dawn approached, casting pink light across the excavation site, Delphine found herself sitting alone beside the ancient cedar, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. The excavation team had departed to properly document and preserve their findings, leaving her alone with the tree that had guarded its secrets for generations. She placed her palm against its rough bark, feeling the living presence that had witnessed centuries of human stories unfold around it. Her grandmother had taught her that trees were among the most patient listeners, absorbing human truths into their rings, holding memories longer than any written record. "You've been waiting for this moment," she whispered to the ancient sentinel, "just as my ancestors were waiting for me to remember." The documents found beneath its roots had completed a circle begun months earlier with the mysterious code's arrival on Thaddeus's desk. Together, they offered not just historical evidence but a methodology for moving forward, a model of relationship that acknowledged both legal ownership and deeper obligations to place and community. As the city awakened around her, Delphine felt a curious lightness spreading through her chest. The weight of guardianship remained, but it had transformed from burden to privilege, the honor of standing at the intersection of past and future, helping to translate between ways of knowing that had too long remained separate. Later that morning, the Heritage Council convened an emergency session to review the newly discovered documents. Representatives from tribal governments, corporate leadership, and academic institutions gathered around the conference table that Delphine had cleaned for 15 years before finding herself seated at it as a respected voice. "These covenants fundamentally reshape our understanding of Horizon's relationship to these lands," Dr. Jefferson explained, carefully displaying the maps with their detailed notations of places requiring protection. "They don't invalidate ownership in the conventional sense, but they establish ongoing responsibilities that transcend simple possession." Thaddeus, who might once have viewed such complications as threats to corporate autonomy, now leaned forward with genuine engagement. "How do we honor these specific obligations within contemporary frameworks? Some of these sites have been developed over decades." "That's where the Council's approach becomes essential," Delphine suggested. "Not trying to recreate the past exactly, but finding contemporary expressions of the original intent. If a ceremonial site is now beneath an office building, perhaps that space becomes available for cultural events. If a traditional harvesting area is now landscaped garden, perhaps it's replanted with traditional food plants and made accessible to tribal members." The discussion continued throughout the day, collaborative problem-solving replacing what might once have been defensive legal maneuvering. By evening, a framework had emerged for integrating these newfound obligations into not just the Rainier project, but all of Horizon's properties, a comprehensive reassessment of corporate land stewardship that acknowledged historical debts while creating future possibilities. As council members departed, Cordelia remained behind, having attended as the financial department's representative. Mother and daughter stood at the window overlooking the garden where the cedar still stood, its roots now carefully recovered after yielding their long-held secrets. "When I sent that code to Thaddeus, I never imagined all this," Cordelia admitted. "I was just trying to force acknowledgement of historical land issues, maybe secure some concessions for the Rainier project. I had no idea I was part of something stretching back generations." Delphine smiled gently. "Knowledge finds its way forward, even when we don't fully understand our part in its journey. Your instinct to challenge the status quo was as much your heritage as my ability to read the symbols. Cordelia leaned against her mother's shoulder in a rare gesture of vulnerability. You've changed this place, Mum. Changed how people see themselves and their work. Not just me, Delphine corrected. All of us, connecting to something larger than corporate quarterly goals or individual advancement. Remembering that we're part of stories that began before us and will continue after us. As twilight settled over Seattle, mother and daughter walked together through the garden where ancient secrets had been buried and recovered, their shadows stretching before them like bridges between past and future. Summer arrived with uncharacteristic warmth, bathing Seattle in golden light that transformed the city's typically muted palette. Construction on the Rainier project proceeded steadily, its revised design now a source of civic pride rather than controversy. Local news outlets regularly featured updates on its innovative integration of indigenous design principles, ecological restoration, and economic development. A new model of corporate responsibility emerging from historical reconciliation. For Delphine, the passing months had brought gradual adjustment to her transformed position. The Heritage Council had become her primary focus, though she still maintained her cleaning shifts 2 evenings a week, not from financial necessity, but from a deep understanding that her effectiveness came precisely from maintaining connections across hierarchical boundaries. On this particular morning, she stood in her small backyard garden, tending to plants she had carefully selected based on her grandmother's teachings, traditional medicinal herbs alongside modern vegetables, beauty and utility intertwined as they had been in the mountain cabin of her childhood. The modest house she had purchased with her translation payment and council salary sat on a hill overlooking Lake Washington, its windows capturing morning light in a way that reminded her of dawn breaking over the Smoky Mountains. The garden gate opened, admitting Phineas, whose academic awkwardness had softened over months of collaboration, but never quite disappeared. He carried a thick folder under his arm, his expression animated with discovery. "I hope I'm not intruding," he began, accepting the glass of iced tea she offered, "but I've completed the final analysis of the symbolic systems in both document sets, and the findings are remarkable." They settled on the small patio, where Delphine had created a space for reflection, comfortable chairs surrounding a small fire pit, with her grandmother's woven blanket draped across one seat. The blanket's patterns seemed to shift in the dappled sunlight, revealing connections that had always been present, but only recently recognized. "The coding system your ancestors developed wasn't just a method of hiding information," Phineas explained, spreading his notes across the table. "It was a complete epistemological framework, a way of organizing knowledge that integrated multiple perspectives simultaneously." Delphine smiled at his academic terminology, which she had gradually learned to translate into more accessible language. "A way of seeing the world that holds different truths at the same time." "Exactly." His enthusiasm was infectious. "Western knowledge systems tend to be hierarchical and categorical, separating science from spirituality, objective from subjective, legal from cultural. This system your ancestors developed integrates all these dimensions within a single symbolic language." He pointed to specific patterns that appeared in both document sets. "These symbols don't just represent information, they represent relationships between different types of knowledge. The same symbol might simultaneously indicate a geographical location, a seasonal timing, a familial responsibility, and a spiritual significance." This revelation settled over Delphine like gentle rain, nourishing understanding that had been germinating since she first recognized the symbols in Thaddeus's office nearly a year earlier. Her grandmother had tried to teach her this integrated way of seeing, not through explicit instruction, but through stories that connected place, time, family, and spirit into seamless understanding. "This is why the council approach has been so effective," she realized aloud. "We've been unconsciously recreating this methodology, bringing different knowledge systems into relationship rather than privileging one over others." Phineas nodded eagerly. "I believe this framework has significant implications beyond horizon or even land management issues. It offers a model for addressing complex contemporary challenges that resist single-discipline approaches." As they discussed possibilities for expanding this methodology to other contexts, Delphine's phone chimed with a message from Thaddeus, "Major breakthrough at Rainier site." Can you come immediately?" An hour later, she stood beside Thaddeus at the construction site, where excavation for the cultural center's foundation had uncovered something unexpected, a layer of shells and artifacts indicating a previously undocumented settlement site of significant age and complexity. "Initial dating suggests continuous occupation for over 3,000 years, explained the archaeological consultant, pointing to carefully marked sections of the excavation. "It appears to have been a major trading location where multiple tribal groups interacted." The significance was immediately clear to everyone present. This discovery transformed the project from one honoring historical agreements to one directly engaging with the deep history of the land itself. The cultural center, originally conceived as primarily educational, would now incorporate an active archaeological site of major significance. Thaddeus, who once would have seen such a discovery as an expensive delay, now surveyed the site with thoughtful engagement. "We'll need to completely redesign this section of the project. The cultural center should be reconfigured to make this history the centerpiece, not just an exhibit." He turned to Delphine. "The council should take the lead on this. Bring together tribal archaeological experts, community elders, museum specialists, whoever is needed to ensure this is handled with appropriate reverence and scholarly care." As word of the discovery spread, the Rainier project gained national attention, highlighting Horizon's transformation from a company fighting indigenous land claims to one actively collaborating in revealing and honoring the land's full history. Journalists increasingly sought interviews with Delphine, fascinated by the unlikely story of a cleaning woman whose cultural knowledge had catalyzed corporate transformation. Most of these requests she politely declined, uncomfortable with narratives that cast her as either corporate savior or indigenous wisdom keeper. The truth, as always, was more complex. She was neither hero nor symbol, but a person navigating the spaces between worlds, translating across boundaries others perceived as fixed. The exception was a thoughtful documentary team from the Smithsonian, whose approach emphasized the collaborative methodology rather than individual personalities. For this project, she agreed to on-camera conversations, using the opportunity to articulate the integrated knowledge system her ancestors had developed and preserved. "The code wasn't just about hiding information," she explained, as cameras captured her walking through the garden at Horizon headquarters, the ancient cedar standing sentinel behind her. "It was about maintaining different ways of knowing in relationship with each other. Written documents have power in American legal systems, but they flatten experience into single dimensions. My ancestors created a way to preserve the fullness of their understanding while still engaging with new systems of power." This concept of maintaining multiple knowledge systems in creative tension rather than competition became the framework for the cultural center's design. Rather than presenting a single authoritative narrative of the land's history, the center would offer multiple pathways through its collections, encouraging visitors to consider how different ways of knowing, scientific, indigenous, experiential, archival, created richer understanding when brought into conversation. As autumn approached, bringing cooler air and the first hints of color to deciduous trees, the Heritage Council prepared for a significant milestone, the official unveiling of the revised Rainier Project's master plan, incorporating both the newly discovered archaeological site and the obligations revealed in the recovered documents. The evening before this event, Delphine received an unexpected visitor. Ambrose Wheeler, the night security guard whose quiet observations had provided critical insights during her code translation work, appeared at her door with a small wooden box. "My shift starts in an hour," he said by way of greeting, "but I wanted to bring you this personally." Inside the box lay a carved wooden talisman, a circular pendant with the same spiral pattern that marked her family's lineage in the code, surrounded by 7 pointed stars. "My grandfather carved this decades ago," Ambrose explained as she examined it with careful fingers. "He was Cherokee from the Eastern Band, worked security at Horizon in the 1960s when the original headquarters was demolished. He always said he was watching over something important, though he never explained what." Understanding bloomed between them. Ambrose's grandfather had been part of the network of guardians, maintaining vigilance over the burial site beneath the cedar, even as corporate development transformed the landscape around it. "Our families have been connected longer than either of us knew," Delphine said softly. Ambrose nodded. Different tribes, different roles, but part of the same circle of keeping. He gestured to the pendant. He would have wanted you to have this, to wear tomorrow when the new plans are revealed. The gift was more than a personal connection. It was recognition of shared responsibility across generations, acknowledgement that her role as facilitator of new relationships was itself part of an ancient tradition of maintaining balance between different ways of being in the world. The following day, as she prepared for the unveiling ceremony, Delphine wore the carved pendant against her skin beneath the professional attire that still felt somewhat foreign despite months of adaptation. Its wooden presence reminded her of continuity beneath change, of responsibility carried forward in new forms. The ceremony itself unfolded on the Rainier site, where a temporary pavilion had been erected, overlooking both the construction areas and the newly discovered archaeological site, now carefully protected beneath transparent flooring that would become a permanent feature of the cultural center. Representatives from tribal governments, city officials, corporate leadership and community organizations gathered to witness the unveiling of plans that had evolved far beyond the original corporate expansion. Thaddeus, standing at the podium with uncharacteristic humility, acknowledged this transformation directly. What began as a standard development project has become something much more significant, a reconsideration of what it means to occupy space, to claim ownership, to honor obligations that transcend conventional business timeframes. His gaze found Delphine in the audience. We have been fortunate to rediscover wisdom that was preserved by those who understood that true sustainability requires maintaining multiple ways of knowing in relationship with each other. As digital renderings displayed the reimagined project, its cultural center incorporating the archaeological site, its office spaces designed according to indigenous principles of orientation and relationship, its waterfront restored to support traditional harvesting alongside modern recreation. Delphine felt the pendant warm against her skin, as if activated by this moment of public recognition for knowledge systems long marginalized but never lost. When invited to speak, she approached the podium with the quiet confidence that had gradually replaced her former instinct toward invisibility. The audience before her represented worlds that had once seemed irreconcilably separate: corporate power and indigenous wisdom, academic expertise and community experience, historical preservation and future development. The code that brought us to this moment wasn't just a puzzle to be solved, she began, her voice clear in the autumn air. It was an invitation to remember that the most important knowledge isn't contained in any single system, but in the relationships between them. My ancestors preserved their understanding not by rejecting new realities, but by creating frameworks that could hold multiple truths simultaneously. She gestured toward the site around them, where ancient shell middens and modern construction equipment coexisted in temporary harmony. This project has become a contemporary expression of that same wisdom, not erasing the past or rejecting the future, but creating space where different ways of knowing can illuminate each other. As applause greeted her words, Delphine caught sight of her daughter in the audience, Cordelia's expression reflecting pride, tinged with lingering amazement at her mother's transformation. Beside her sat Eleanor Clayton in her wheelchair, having a rare good day where awareness penetrated her dementia, enough to witness this moment of family continuity. The pendant seemed to pulse against Delphine's skin, a tangible connection to generations who had maintained knowledge through changing times. The spiral pattern it bore, the same that appeared on her grandmother's blanket in the ancient code and in the seal on the buried documents, represented not a closed circle, but an ongoing spiral, knowledge moving forward through time while maintaining connection to its origins. In that moment of public acknowledgement, standing between worlds as her ancestors had done, Delphine Clayton understood that the greatest wisdom lay not in choosing between different ways of knowing, but in creating spaces where they could speak to each other across their differences, each illuminating what the others could not see alone. Winter solstice arrived with characteristic Pacific Northwest subtlety, not dramatic darkness, but a gentle deepening of twilight that seemed to begin in mid-afternoon, wrapping Seattle in premature evening. 1 year had passed since Delphine's first encounter with the mysterious code, a year of transformation that had reshaped not just her life, but the relationship between Horizon Technologies and the land it occupied. The Rainier project was now a national model for integrated development. Its innovative combination of corporate functionality, cultural preservation, ecological restoration, and community accessibility featured in architectural journals and business ethics cases alike. What had begun as Thaddeus Remington's crown jewel of expansion had evolved into something more significant, a physical manifestation of the integrated knowledge system Delphine's ancestors had preserved in their dual record-keeping. On this shortest day of the year, Delphine stood at the center of the Heritage Garden, the renamed space surrounding the ancient cedar where the buried documents had been discovered. The tree's massive trunk was now the focal point of a circular gathering space, designed according to Cherokee astronomical principles, with stone seating arranged to mark solstice and equinox alignments. She had chosen this date and location deliberately for what would be her final official act as facilitator of the Heritage Council before stepping into a new role. Around her gathered representatives from each constituency. The council had brought together tribal elders, corporate executives, academic researchers, community organizers, and the invisible workforce that maintained the physical spaces where power operated. Among them stood those who had become significant presences in her transformed life. Thaddeus, whose corporate brilliance had found new expression through historical reconciliation. Evangeline, who had recently launched an internal mentorship program connecting executive leadership with support staff. Phineas, whose academic expertise had expanded to include indigenous knowledge systems. Ambrose, whose quiet vigilance had been recognized with a formal role in site protection, and Cordelia, who had found her own path of integration between corporate advancement and ethical accountability. A year ago, we gathered to unveil plans for a transformed project, Delphine began, her voice carrying clearly in the winter air. Today, we meet to formalize that transformation into permanent structure through the establishment of the Horizon Heritage Trust. She gestured to the documents displayed on a ceremonial table crafted from salvaged timber from the original Horizon headquarters. This legal framework ensures that the obligations revealed in the recovered documents will be honored, regardless of corporate leadership changes or ownership transitions. The integrated management approach pioneered by the Council becomes permanent, with representation guaranteed for all knowledge systems that contribute to genuine stewardship. Thaddeus stepped forward to sign the trust documents first, his pen hovering momentarily above the paper. When a mysterious code arrived on my desk a year ago, I saw it as a threat to everything I had built, he acknowledged, his typically controlled voice carrying unexpected emotion. I could never have imagined it would instead reveal a more meaningful foundation upon which to build. As each representative added their signature, Delphine felt the completion of a circle that had begun generations earlier, her ancestors creating a dual record-keeping system that preserved obligations the dominant culture would have erased, those records waiting patiently until the moment when they could help reshape contemporary relationships to land and community. Yet even as this circle completed, new spirals were beginning. Following the ceremony, she would transition from council facilitator to director of a new initiative, extending the integrated methodology beyond land management to other areas where different knowledge systems needed reconciliation: healthcare delivery in indigenous communities, educational approaches that honored multiple ways of knowing, technological development guided by traditional wisdom about responsible innovation. After the formal signing, as participants mingled in the gathering twilight, Delphine found herself standing beside the ancient cedar with her daughter and Thaddeus, three people whose lives had been profoundly altered by the code's unfolding. "What happens now?" Cordelia asked, looking out over the Rainier site where construction continued despite the winter season, lights illuminating workers in the early darkness. "The work continues," Thaddeus replied, his corporate certainty now tempered with reflective understanding, "but with better awareness of the contexts we operate within, historical, cultural, ecological." He glanced at Delphine, "and with better translators between different ways of seeing the world." Delphine touched the wooden pendant that she now wore openly, its spiral pattern catching the garden lights. "My grandmother used to say that wisdom isn't found in having all the answers, but in asking better questions. Perhaps that's the most important thing we've learned, how to question our assumptions about what matters and whose knowledge counts. As others departed, Delphine remained in the garden, watching darkness settle completely over the city her ancestors could never have imagined, but had nonetheless prepared for through their careful preservation of knowledge. The skyline glittered with thousands of lights, a constellation of human ambition and ingenuity built upon land that carried deeper, older stories in its patient soil. She placed her palm against the cedar's rough bark, feeling the living connection to generations who had stood as guardians of multiple truths. The tree had witnessed centuries of transformation, forest giving way to settlement, settlement to city, city constantly reinventing itself through cycles of development and rediscovery. Throughout these changes, it had maintained its essential nature, growing not despite history but in relationship with it, each ring recording another year of human stories unfolding around its steadfast presence. Later that evening, in her small house overlooking the lake, Delphine spread her grandmother's blanket across her bed, as she had done countless times throughout the year of transformation. Its woven patterns, once merely beautiful designs to her untrained eye, now revealed their complex meanings, each symbol simultaneously indicating geographical location, seasonal timing, familial responsibility, and spiritual significance. She traced the central spiral with gentle fingers, understanding now that it represented not a closed circle, but an ongoing journey, knowledge moving forward through time while maintaining connection to its origins. Her grandmother had prepared her for her role as guardian, not through explicit instruction, but through stories that connected place, time, family, and spirit into seamless understanding. As moonlight filtered through her window, casting silver patterns across the woven symbols, Delphine reflected on the journey that had carried her from invisible cleaner to recognized wisdom keeper. The most profound transformation had not been her external circumstances, though these had certainly changed dramatically, but her internal understanding of herself as part of a continuing lineage of people who maintained knowledge across boundaries of time and culture. The cleaning woman who had once moved invisibly through corporate spaces had not disappeared but evolved, integrating that perspective of careful observation with the more visible role of facilitating connections between worlds designed to remain separate. In maintaining both identities simultaneously, she embodied the very methodology her ancestors had preserved, holding multiple truths in relationship rather than requiring choice between them. Morning would bring new responsibilities, new challenges in translating between different ways of knowing, but in this moment of winter stillness, as the year reached its darkest point, before beginning its gradual return toward light, Delphine Clayton rested in the certainty that wisdom reveals itself, not in grand revelations, but in patient attention to patterns that connect across apparent differences. The ancient symbols her grandmother had taught her, the modern corporate structures she had helped transform, the relationships she had built across boundaries of class and culture, all were expressions of the same fundamental understanding that had been preserved in the mysterious code. Truth is found not in any single system of knowledge, but in the spaces between them, where different ways of seeing illuminate each other across their differences. Outside her window, Seattle's modern towers stood sentinel against the night sky, while beneath them, the land held older stories in its patience. Delphine Clayton, once invisible cleaner of corporate spaces, now stood at the intersection of these narratives, not their owner but their keeper, ensuring that multiple truths could flow together like streams toward a more complete understanding. In the gentle darkness of winter solstice, this understanding settled around her like her grandmother's blanket, not a burden but a protection, not a constraint but an invitation to continue the spiral journey of knowledge, moving forward through time while remaining connected to its origins. "The old symbols speak truths that echo across time," she whispered, repeating her grandmother's words from long ago. The words hung in the stillness of her room, both ancient wisdom and contemporary truth, bridging generations just as she had become a bridge between worlds that had forgotten how to speak to each other. In that moment of quiet completion, Delphine understood that the most profound legacy of the mysterious code wasn't the corporate transformation it had catalyzed, or even the historical reconciliation it had facilitated, but the remembering it had awakened. Remembering that different ways of knowing need not compete for dominance, but can instead illuminate what each alone cannot see. As she drifted towards sleep beneath her grandmother's blanket, Seattle's rain began its gentle percussion against her windows. Not winter's icy needles, but spring's nourishing drops, arriving early as if to emphasize that even in deepest darkness, renewal is already beginning its patient work beneath the surface of things.